The day began like any other in the rolling hills of Galilee. The sun climbed high into a brilliant blue sky. It cast its warm, golden light across the land. A gentle breeze whispered through the tall grasses. It carried the scent of wildflowers. It carried the distant, salty air of the sea. But this day would be different. This day would become etched in history forever, a story told and retold for thousands of years. It started not with a bang, but with a whisper. A rumor that spread from village to village. A rumor that spread from person to person, like a spark catching on dry tinder. He was here, the teacher from Nazareth, the one who spoke with such authority, the one who healed the sick and gave hope to the hopeless. His name was Jesus, and where he went, the people followed. They came from every direction. Fishermen left their nets drying on the shore. Farmers abandoned their plows in the middle of the field. Merchants closed their shops. Mothers gathered their children. They formed a trickle, then a stream, soon a river of people. This was not an organized procession. There were no banners, no grand marshals leading the way. They walked for miles under the hot sun. Their feet grew tired. Their clothes became dusty. Yet they pressed on, driven by a deep, unspoken yearning. They wanted to hear him. They needed to see him. To be in his presence was to feel a connection to something greater than themselves, something divine. Each person had their own reason for being there, their own private prayer, their own secret burden they hoped he could lift. The crowd swelled with every passing hour. It was a living, breathing entity. The air crackled with a unique energy. It was a mixture of anticipation, excitement, and a quiet desperation. You could hear the murmur of thousands of voices blending into a single, constant hum. The shuffle of countless sandals on the dusty ground provided a steady rhythm. They were all strangers, yet they were united in this single purpose. They were a testament to the power of a single idea. A single man, who had captured the imagination of an entire region, drawing them out into the wilderness, far from the comfort of their homes. They finally came to a remote place near the Sea of Galilee. It was a desolate, lonely spot, a natural amphitheater formed by the gentle slopes of the hills. Here there were no towns, no markets, no homes. Just the wide open sky above and the hard, dry earth below. The crowd settled upon the grassy slopes, a vast sea of faces looking towards one focal point. From a distance they looked like a scattered carpet of vibrant colors against the green landscape and the brown landscape. There were young men with strong shoulders, old women with faces etched by time and hardship. The number was staggering. There were at least 5,000 men, women, children. Imagine looking out at that multitude. A city's worth of people all gathered in the middle of nowhere. Each face told a story of struggle, of joy, of faith, of doubt. Some eyes shone with unwavering belief, others were filled with a cautious skepticism, wondering if this man was truly who people said he was. But all eyes were fixed on him. All ears were waiting to catch his every word. As the afternoon wore on, a new feeling began to creep into the crowd. The initial excitement started to fade, replaced by a more practical concern. Hunger, a gnawing emptiness began to stir in their stomachs. They had been so focused on their journey, so captivated by the teacher, that they had forgotten about their physical needs. The sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beautiful sunset served as a reminder that the day was ending, and they were far from any source of food or shelter. The sounds of the crowd began to change. The enthusiastic murmurs were now mixed with the cries of hungry children. The quiet conversations turned to worried whispers. Where would they get food? How would they feed their families? A feeling of unease began to ripple through the masses. They were in a deserted place. The nearest villages were miles away, and even they would not have enough food to feed such a colossal gathering. Their hope was now tinged with a growing sense of reality. They were isolated, they were numerous, and they were very, very hungry. In the center of it all stood Jesus. He was not on a grand stage or an elevated platform. He sat among them, on the same grass, under the same sky. He had been teaching them for hours. His voice was calm and clear, carrying across the hillside. He spoke of love. He spoke of forgiveness. He spoke of a kingdom not of this world. His words were like water to thirsty souls. The people drank them in. He saw past the surface, beyond the sea of faces. He saw into their hearts. He knew their hopes. He knew their fears. He knew their deepest needs. He saw their physical hunger as well. It was a tangible presence, an unspoken question hanging in the air. He looked out at the thousands before him with a deep sense of compassion. These were his people. They had followed him out into the wilderness, trusting him completely. He would not send them away empty. He felt their weariness and their growing anxiety. The disciples, his closest followers, felt it too. They came to him, their faces etched with worry. They saw a problem, a logistical nightmare of impossible proportions. "This is a remote place," they told him, "and it's already getting late." Their voices were practical, filled with common sense. "Send the crowds away, so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." It was a reasonable suggestion, the most logical solution to an overwhelming problem. Let the people take care of themselves. It was too big a burden for any one group to handle. They saw the problem in terms of numbers. They saw the problem in terms of logistics. They saw the problem in terms of limitations. They saw the impossibility of the situation. But Jesus saw something else. He saw an opportunity to teach a lesson far greater than any he had shared that day. A lesson not just for the crowd, but for his own disciples. He saw a chance to demonstrate a different kind of power. He saw a chance to demonstrate a different kind of provision. He looked at his worried followers. He looked back out at the hungry multitude. A quiet calm settled over him. The challenge was immense. The need was great. His purpose was clear. The stage was set for something extraordinary, something no one there would ever forget. The sun continued its slow march toward the western horizon. Its golden rays grew longer, stretching across the landscape. The shadows of the people gathered on the hillside began to lengthen. The air, once warm and buzzing with energy, started to cool. A new reality began to settle in. The spiritual feast of Jesus' words had been fulfilling, but now, a more basic human need was making itself known. The collective stomach of the crowd began to rumble. The initial excitement had given way to the gnawing pangs of hunger. It was a problem that could no longer be ignored. The disciples, ever practical, felt the shift in the atmosphere. They were men of the world, fishermen, tax collectors. They looked at the vast sea of humanity spread before them. They saw the tired faces of parents. They heard the faint cries of hungry children. Their anxiety grew with each passing moment. This was an entire city's worth of people, stranded in a deserted place as night approached. They felt a heavy weight of responsibility. They approached Jesus, faces a mixture of concern and urgency. Philip was doing the math in his head. Jesus listened to his disciples' concerns. He heard the practicality in their voices and he understood their logic. They had, correctly assessed the situation based on what they could see and what they knew. "Send the crowds away," they urged him again. "Let them go and find food for themselves." It was the sensible thing to do, the responsible course of action from a worldly perspective. It was a plan that shifted the burden from their shoulders onto the individuals in the crowd. It was a way to manage the crisis by dismantling it, piece by piece, person by person. But Jesus had a different lesson in mind. He turned to Philip, putting the problem directly to him. "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" he asked. The question was not asked out of ignorance. Jesus already knew what he was going to do. This was a test, a teachable moment designed to stretch his disciples' faith, beyond the boundaries of the visible world. He wanted them to see beyond the problem. He wanted them to look to a different kind of source for the solution. He was, honestly, challenging them to think outside the box of human limitation. Philip was quick with his reply. His mind, already working on the numbers, had the answer ready. It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have just a single bite. You can almost hear the exasperation in his voice. He was stating a fact. He had done the calculation and arrived at the only logical conclusion. It was impossible. The resources required were astronomical, far beyond their meager means. Philip saw the problem in terms of money, in terms of quantity, a wall too high to climb. The other disciples likely nodded in agreement. Philip had put their shared anxiety into words. They had hit a dead end. Jesus did not rebuke Philip for his lack of faith. He simply moved to the next step of his lesson. He turned to another disciple, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. The question changed slightly. It moved from the theoretical problem of buying food to a more immediate, practical inventory. "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked them. "Go and see." The instruction was simple. It was a call to action. Stop focusing on what you don't have and start by assessing what you do have, no matter how small. This sent the disciples on a new mission. They moved through the vast crowd, their task now clear. They were no longer just messengers of dismissal. They were on a search. They went from group to group, from family to family, asking the same question. "Do you have any food? Anything at all?" Imagine them wading through that sea of people, asking a question that must have seemed almost absurd. They were looking for a few crumbs to solve a mountain of hunger. It was a humbling task. The search would have been mostly fruitless. Most people had come unprepared. They had brought their hopes and their faith, but not their picnic baskets. The disciples likely received many shakes of the head, many apologetic looks. The scarcity was real. Their initial assessment was correct. There was not enough food here to feed a fraction of the people present. The search seemed destined to fail. But then, Andrew found something. It wasn't much. It was hardly anything at all. It was so small it seemed almost laughable. Yet, it was something. A tiny seed of possibility in a vast desert of scarcity. Andrew returned to Jesus, a mix of hope and doubt on his face. He was not empty-handed, but what he held felt ridiculously small. He had found a boy, just one small boy in the midst of the vast, sprawling crowd. This boy had come prepared, or perhaps his mother had prepared him. She had packed him a simple lunch. In the boy's possession were 5 barley loaves. These were not large, fluffy loaves. Small, flat, round cakes, coarse biscuits. Alongside the loaves he had 2 small fish, pickled, salted. This was the sum total of their findings. The entire inventory of food for a crowd of thousands was a single packed lunch. It was almost nothing, a meal that would barely satisfy one hungry man, let alone 5,000. Andrew presented it to Jesus almost apologetically. It seemed so insignificant, so utterly inadequate. The disciples likely looked at the small offering, then back at the sea of faces. The gap between the two felt like an impassable chasm. Yet, the boy gave it willingly. His simple act of sharing is the pivot upon which the entire event turns. He didn't hoard his small meal. He offered up everything he had. He trusted the disciples. He trusted the teacher they served. This small act of generosity, this simple gift from a child, became the raw material for a miracle. It was a tiny seed of faith planted in a field of doubt. Andrew held out the meager provisions. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves, 2 small fish," he said. "But what are they?" he asked, gesturing to the immense crowd. "What is this among so many?" It was a question born of pure logic. The question hung in the air. It was the voice of reason against a backdrop of impossible circumstances. Jesus had intentionally led his disciples to this point. He had led them to the very edge of their own limitations, to the point where their own strength and logic failed completely. It was only here, in this place of acknowledged helplessness, that they could be open to a different kind of solution. Jesus looked at the small meal. He did not dismiss it. He saw not its smallness, but its potential. He saw the boy's faith. He saw his disciples' desperation. He saw the crowd's hunger, and in this perfect convergence of need and faith, he saw the opportunity to reveal the boundless abundance of God. The disciples saw a problem of scarcity. Jesus saw a canvas for grace.
Narrator VO. Jesus' response to the disciples' doubt was not an argument or a rebuke. It was a simple, clear instruction. A command that seemed to ignore the problem of the food entirely. "Have the people sit down," he said. "Jesus, have the people sit down."
Narrator VO. His voice was calm, filled with an authority that cut through their anxiety. He didn't address the lack of food. He simply began to organize the banquet. He started to prepare for a feast that, by all earthly logic, did not exist. The disciples must have been stunned. The instruction made no practical sense. It required a leap of faith. Narrator VO. But they obeyed. This is a testament to their trust in Jesus even when they did not understand. They moved through the crowd. "Sit down," they instructed. "Find a place on the grass." They began to organize the people into groups, companies of 50s, companies of hundreds. Narrator VO. This was not a chaotic mob scene. It was an act of deliberate organization. The vast, formless sea of humanity was being transformed into an orderly gathering, a community of guests waiting to be served. The murmur of the crowd would have shifted, anxious whispers, quiet curiosity. Narrator VO. The act of sitting down itself is an act of expectation. It is what you do when you are waiting to receive something. Jesus was not just organizing a crowd, he was preparing their hearts. He was asking them to transition from worried wandering to one of patient, expectant waiting. The stage was now perfectly set. Narrator VO. The organization of the crowd was more than just good logistics, it was a profound act of faith. By telling the people to sit in orderly groups, Jesus was treating them as honored guests at a great feast. He was bestowing dignity upon them. This simple command to sit down was a declaration that everyone would be seen, everyone would be included, everyone would be fed. Narrator, VO. The disciples, in carrying out this command, became active participants in the miracle. Their obedience was crucial. They had to trust Jesus' word over the evidence of their own eyes. A hush of anticipation fell over the multitude. All eyes were now fixed on the single figure at the center. Narrator, VO. With the crowd seated and a hush of expectation falling over the hillside, Jesus took the 5 barley loaves and the 2 fish into his hands. He did not look at them as a symbol of scarcity. Instead, he held them up as an offering, a starting point. Narrator, VO. This was the moment where human limitation met divine possibility. All eyes were on him. The disciples watched, lingering doubt, a burgeoning hope. The thousands of seated guests watched, their hunger a palpable presence in the cooling evening air. Narrator, VO. Then, Jesus looked up to heaven, a simple, profound gesture, a public acknowledgement of a higher source, an act of communion, joining earthly need to heavenly supply, turning focus away from the meager meal toward the infinite power of God the Father.
Narrator, VO. After looking to heaven, he gave thanks. He blessed the food. He spoke words of gratitude for the little they had. By blessing the food, he consecrated it, set it apart for a holy purpose.
Narrator, VO. Once the blessing was complete, he broke the loaves. Deeply symbolic. Bread is meant to be broken and shared. The small loaves snapping, barely audible, yet it signaled the beginning of the miracle. He gave the broken pieces and the fish to his disciples. Narrator, VO. The disciples took the broken pieces of bread and fish from Jesus' hands. They were holding what still appeared to be a pitifully small amount of food. They had to proceed on pure faith. They moved to the first groups of 50 and 100. They began to hand out the food. Narrator, VO. And then, something extraordinary began to happen. The bread they held in their hands did not diminish. As they gave a piece away, another seemed to be there in its place. The fish they distributed was somehow replenished. The basket they carried did not empty. It was a quiet, continuous, and utterly baffling miracle. Narrator, VO. The disciples must have looked at each other in wide-eyed astonishment. Their earlier doubts would have melted away, replaced by a profound sense of awe and wonder. They were active participants in a divine act. They were the waiters at God's own banquet. Narrator, VO. The process was orderly and calm. Because the crowd was seated in groups, the distribution was efficient. There was no pushing or shoving, no desperate scramble for food. It transformed what could have been a chaotic riot into a peaceful, dignified feast. Narrator, VO. The miracle was not a one-time event, but a continuous flow. The disciples moved deeper and deeper into the crowd, their baskets perpetually full. What started as a small offering in the hands of Jesus had become a river of provision, flowing out to nourish the thousands. Narrator, VO. Imagine being one of the people in the crowd. They hand you a piece, more than just a bite. It's a real portion. The bread is real, the fish is real. The murmurs of curiosity would have turned into gasps of amazement and then joyful exclamations. Narrator, VO. The Bible is clear, everyone ate. And they didn't just have a small sample. They ate as much as they wanted. They ate until they were completely satisfied. The provision was not just adequate, it was extravagantly abundant. Jesus did not just solve the problem of hunger, he replaced it with a feast of plenty. The meal was over. A deep sense of satisfaction settled over the vast crowd. The anxiety and desperation had vanished, replaced by a palpable sense of peace, joy, overwhelming gratitude. A shared experience bonded everyone there.
Gather the pieces that are left over, he commanded. Let nothing be wasted.
This must have seemed like a strange request. After creating an infinite supply of food, why worry about the leftovers? It was a lesson in stewardship. Even in overwhelming abundance, God's gifts are precious. Every crumb was a testament to the miracle. So the disciples went out again among the people. This time their baskets were empty. They moved through the groups. Not to give, but to collect. The people handed them the broken pieces of bread and fish. Their baskets began to fill and grow heavy. When they had finished their task, they brought the baskets back to Jesus. They counted them. There were 12 baskets in total, one for each of the 12 disciples. This was surely no coincidence. A powerful personal reminder for each disciple. Each held a basket overflowing with evidence of God's abundance. They had started with doubt and ended with a surplus. The leftovers were physical, tangible proof that this was no illusion. As the disciples stood with their 12 full baskets, the crowd, seeing the mountain of leftovers, was utterly convinced of Jesus' power. Their desire to make him an earthly king intensified. They saw a solution to their political problems. They saw a solution to their economic problems. They had been filled with bread, but now they were hungry for power, for freedom from Rome, for a kingdom of this world. Whispers began to spread through the crowd. This was more than a prophet. This was the one they had been waiting for, the Messiah. Jesus perceived this immediately. He saw that they had witnessed the sign but had misunderstood its meaning. He had offered them a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven, and they were trying to force it into an earthly mold. He had not come to be the kind of king they wanted. Seeing that they were about to seize him and make him king by force, he knew he had to leave. He instructed his disciples to get into their boat and go on ahead of him to the other side of the sea. He then dismissed the crowd. Imagine the confusion. At the very peak of his popularity, he sent them all away. He turned his back on the power they were offering him. He rejected their vision for his future. He chose solitude over a throne. He withdrew from the very people he had just miraculously fed. Jesus went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. He left the noise, the adoration, and the misunderstanding behind. He sought communion with his Father. The story of that day on the hillside did not end when the crowd went home. It has continued to echo through the corridors of time for 2,000 years. It poses a fundamental question. Do we live in a universe of scarcity, or do we live in a universe of abundance? Like the disciples, we often look at the world's great problems, hunger, poverty, conflict, and we do the math. We calculate the cost. We measure our resources. And like Philip, we often come to the same conclusion. It is impossible. This story invites us to look beyond our own calculations. It teaches that the journey from scarcity to abundance begins with a simple act of faith. It starts when a young boy is willing to share the little he has. It continues when skeptical disciples obey a command they do not understand. It culminates when thousands of hungry people trust enough to sit and wait. The divine power was the source, but human action and willingness were the channels through which that power flowed. And so, the echo of this miracle challenges us today. Do we focus on what we lack, or do we, like Jesus, take what little we have and give thanks for it? The 12 baskets of leftovers are perhaps the most mysterious part of the story. They were a souvenir from the impossible. For the 12 disciples, each basket was a personal reminder, but there is a deeper meaning to this bread that remains. Jesus fed the crowd's physical hunger, but he knew this was not their deepest need. The next day he would speak to them of a different kind of bread, a bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. The miraculous meal was a sign, a pointer to a greater reality. We all have hungers, meaning purpose, love, connection. We often try to satisfy these deep needs with things that, like the barley loaves, can only fill us for a little while. Success, wealth, pleasure, only to find ourselves hungry again. The feeding of the 5,000 shows us a different way. It suggests that true, lasting satisfaction comes not from what we can grasp for ourselves, but from what is given to us as a gift. It comes when we stop trusting in our own meager supplies and open ourselves to a source of infinite provision. Ultimately, the miracle invites us to trust and to share what we have, no matter how small it seems. Because in the logic of this story, it is only when we give away our 5 loaves and 2 fish that we get to witness them multiply. The bread that remains is the lesson itself. It is the enduring truth that love, like the loaves on that hill, does not diminish when it is shared. It multiplies, and there is always more than enough to go around.